am not, nor ever have been, any other person but me. I am not trying to lead people to believe.
They say the king of rock and roll never actually died. They say he faked the whole thing, walked away from the fame that was slowly killing him, and vanished into a small Arkansas church, where he now sings to God under another man's name. For years, that man refused to breathe a word about any of it. But he is old and frail now, his time is almost gone, and word is spreading fast that he has finally decided to reveal exactly who he really is. The man who knows more than he says. There are two men at the center of this story who, by every rule of logic, should never have crossed paths. One of them was the most famous human being on the planet, a singer whose face filled stadiums, and whose death in 1977 left the whole world in genuine mourning. The other is a soft-spoken preacher in a small Arkansas town, a man most of the country had never heard of, quietly tending a modest congregation far from any spotlight. Their lives were never meant to touch, and yet somehow the two of them have become almost impossible to pull apart. What makes this so unsettling is that Bob Joyce does not simply resemble Elvis Presley. Plenty of men have made a living dressing up as the king, and the world has always shrugged them off without a second thought. This is something stranger and far harder to explain away. When people sit in that little church and watch Bob Joyce move and speak and carry himself, they do not feel as though they are watching an impersonator putting on a show. They feel as though they are in the presence of the actual man, older and quieter now, wearing his years like a heavy coat, yet somehow unmistakably himself underneath it all. Then there is the part that truly keeps people awake at night. For a man supposedly sitting at the heart of the greatest music mystery of our time, there is shockingly little that anyone can dig up about where Bob Joyce actually came from. The deeper the curious go searching for his early life, the thinner the trail seems to become, until it feels less like a biography and more like a man who simply appeared one day in Benton, already grown, already gifted, already carrying that heavy and unmistakable weight in his voice. To a mind that is hunting for a secret, a past that quiet does not read as ordinary at all. It reads as a life that someone worked very hard to keep hidden. Bob Joyce does not behave like a man baffled by a crazy rumor. He never seems rattled by it, never rushes to stamp it out, never carries himself like someone tired of being mistaken for a stranger. He holds the whole thing with the calm of a man who understands exactly where it came from. And when he speaks of Elvis, he does not speak of some distant legend he happened to be compared to. He speaks of him with a strange and gentle familiarity, the way you might speak of someone you had known your entire life, or the person who stares back at you in the mirror every morning. And that is the feeling that simply refuses to let people go. It is not that this preacher looks like Elvis, and it is not only that he sounds like him. It is the slow, creeping sense that somewhere behind those tired eyes, Bob Joyce knows something about the king that the rest of us were never told. And whatever that something is, it first began to slip out into the open the very moment the world heard him open his mouth to sing. The voice that should not exist. Forget the theories for a moment and simply listen, because this is where even the skeptics tend to go quiet. When Bob Joyce rises in that little church and sings the old hymns, something happens that is genuinely hard to explain away. The tone is deep and warm and aching in all the same places. The phrasing climbs and falls exactly the way it did on records cut more than 60 years ago. He sings about peace in the valley and about the soul that stands alone. and grown men who walked in as doubters walk back out, visibly shaken. The king said many times that gospel was the music closest to his heart, the sound he came back to whenever the fame and the screaming became too much to bear. So when a man who supposedly shares nothing with him picks up those same sacred songs and delivers them with the same trembling devotion, the coincidence slowly stops feeling like a coincidence and starts feeling like a signature. People began recording it and posting it online, and the videos spread the way fire spreads through dry grass. Somewhere around the year 2011, clips of this Arkansas preacher started reaching people who had spent their whole lives loving Elvis, and the reaction was almost always the same. First came the disbelief, then the goosebumps, then a stubborn certainty that they were somehow listening to a ghost. By the year 2018, the story had grown so large that even mainstream newspapers were printing headlines suggesting Elvis was alive and preaching in Arkansas. Fans began driving hundreds of miles just to sit in that room and hear it in person, because a recording on a phone was no longer enough for them. And most of them did not leave carrying doubt. They left more convinced than they had ever been, because standing a few feet away made the whole thing feel undeniable. The face was older, of course, and the years had done their patient work, yet the essence buried underneath seemed frighteningly intact. The voice alone was enough to start a movement that refused to die. But the voice turned out to be only the beginning, because the people who studied this man most closely soon noticed something even harder to dismiss, sitting right there beside him in the very same room. The bloodline in the room. If this were only about the singing, the whole story might have faded away like so many celebrity rumors eventually do. What kept it burning and pushed it from a curiosity into a full obsession was the family standing around him. Because the people closest to Bob Joyce, the ones who sing and worship at his side, carry features that make believers lean all the way forward in their seats. Look closely at his sons, they will tell you, and really study them. The line of the jaw, the shape of the eyes, the curve of the smile all seem to echo a face the entire world knows better than almost any other. When one of his sons stepped up to sing beside him on a song made famous by Elvis, the internet nearly tore itself apart. Because to a grieving fan, it did not look like a simple tribute. It looked like an inheritance, a bloodline carrying the same unmistakable stamp from one generation into the next. Then came the moment that threw the whole thing into overdrive. Right alongside it came whispers of another photograph, one that appeared to show Priscilla Presley herself standing near the pastor, as though the king's own former wife had slipped quietly into Arkansas to see him. And then there was the funeral. When Lisa Marie Presley was laid to rest, a grainy photograph started circulating that seemed to show Bob Joyce seated among the mourners. For the believers, this was the final piece dropping into place. Why on earth would a humble Arkansas preacher be sitting at the private funeral of Elvis Presley's only daughter, they asked, unless he was something far greater than a preacher, unless he was family in the most literal sense a person could imagine. Every one of these threads, the sons, the grandson, the leaked photograph, the woman who looked so much like Priscilla, the seat among the mourners, wove together into something that felt overwhelming. Taken one at a time, each piece could be brushed aside. Stacked on top of one another, they built a case that millions of people found impossible to walk away from. The believers now had the voice, the faces, and the photographs passed around like sacred relics. There was only one thing left that they truly wanted, and for the longest time, The most maddening part of the whole story was that the man himself almost gave it to them, over and over again without ever quite finishing the sentence. Every time he almost said it. This is the part that pushed people right to the edge, because Bob Joyce never once behaved the way an innocent man supposedly should. He did not laugh the rumor off and move on. He did not grow angry and demand that it stop. Instead, he answered in a way that seemed to say everything and nothing at the very same time. And for a believer, that is 1,000 times more thrilling than a flat denial could ever be. When he finally addressed it in writing back in the autumn of 2017, the words he chose were careful and strange. He said that neither he nor anyone around him had ever tried to lead people into believing that he was some other person. Notice carefully what that sentence does and what it quietly refuses to do. It insists that he never tried to make anyone believe it, yet it never once says the plain and obvious thing, which would simply be to state outright that he is not Elvis Presley. To ears already straining for a secret, that missing sentence felt enormous. Then he said something that poured gasoline over the whole fire. He admitted that most of these folks already knew he was not Elvis, but that it did not seem to matter much to them. And then he added a line people still repeat in hushed and knowing tones today. He said that if Elvis were alive, he would call him his friend and his brother, and that the two of them were of kindred spirits, one together in Christ. To a believer, it sounds like a coded wink, a man confessing the truth in the only language he considers safe enough to use out loud. One devoted follower named Tom Mennel put the whole feeling into words that thousands of people quietly shared. He said that to him, Mr. Joyce simply is Elvis, and that he prays for the day the pastor will finally stand up and admit who he truly is. That is the strange and powerful heart of this entire thing. The denials themselves somehow became the proof. The humility became the evidence, and the silence became a promise waiting to be kept. And a promise like that could only stay unbroken for so long, because after years of these half-answers and gentle riddles, a new wave of videos came crashing in, claiming the old man had finally run out of time and reasons to hide, and that the confession the whole world had begged for was about to be spoken aloud. The night he finally broke. So this is the exact moment the entire story had been building toward, the great climax that millions of people had been promised. The videos arrived carrying an almost unbearable weight. He is dying, they announced solemnly. He knows now that he does not have long left, and with whatever little time remains, he is finally going to look straight into the camera and reveal the truth about who he really is. And then you keep watching, and you keep waiting for the actual words to arrive. You wait for him to say it. You wait for that single sentence. Every one of these videos swore was coming. The moment he finally admits that he is Elvis Presley, and the king never truly died. But that confession never actually comes, and it never comes in a single one of these videos, no matter how many you sit through to the very end. There is simply no confession inside the confession video. The music swells, the tension peaks, and then the clip just ends, leaving you emotionally wrung out and no closer to the truth than when you began. One of the very blogs hosting these videos even admitted it plainly in its own text, confessing that he stopped short of any direct confirmation, and then wondering aloud whether this was a real farewell or merely an ending wrapped in ambiguity. The moment you separate the facts from the internet mythology, the entire theory begins to collapse. The videos making the rounds online blurred two completely different men into a single identity, and that one mistake is enough to unravel everything. Elvis Aaron Presley was born in January 1935. Bob Joyce was born in June 1952, creating an age difference of roughly 17 years. If Elvis had survived, he would now be in his 90s. Bob Joyce is visibly much younger, making the claim impossible before you even look at the rest of the evidence. Then there's Elvis's death itself. This wasn't an unverified rumor or an unexplained disappearance. Elvis died at Graceland in August 1977 at the age of 42. His death was witnessed by family members, officially documented by Tennessee authorities, and supported by medical records that still exist today. There is no missing chapter in the historical record waiting to be discovered. Bob Joyce's own life only strengthens that conclusion. He has been married to his wife, Willina, since 1975, and his life has been publicly documented for decades. The funeral photograph, often presented as proof, turned out to feature country musician Andy Childs, not Bob Joyce at all. It was a simple case of mistaken identity that spread because few people bothered to verify it. Perhaps that's why polls have consistently shown only a small minority ever believed Elvis was still alive. The legend survived not because the evidence was convincing, but because people wanted it to be true. And that's exactly what modern viral videos continue to exploit: our willingness to believe a comforting mystery over an ordinary fact. The real reason we needed him alive. Bob Joyce is not Elvis Presley. He never confessed to being Elvis because there was never any confession to give, and there is no grand deathbed revelation sitting somewhere waiting to drop. He is exactly what he always claimed to be: a small-town preacher blessed with an extraordinary gift for the old hymns. And if that leaves you feeling a little hollow inside, please do not be ashamed of it for even a second, because that hollow feeling is the true subject of this entire story. The plain truth is that this was never really about the pastor at all. It was always about us. It was about that stubborn and tender refusal to let go of a man whose voice was stitched into the happiest moments of our lives. For nearly 50 years, people have kept Elvis alive in gas station sightings and blurry roadside photographs, not because they are foolish, but because grief and love simply do not obey a death certificate. What has changed, and changed terrifyingly fast, is that a machine has now learned exactly how to feed on that longing, and it feeds on it without a single shred of mercy. This is so much bigger than one Arkansas preacher now. In just the past year, real ministers have watched their own faces stolen and puppeteered by artificial intelligence to beg strangers for money. One deeply loved priest with more than 1 million followers had to publicly warn his own audience that the man in the fundraising videos was not really him, because even the words and the movements of his mouth had been manufactured out of thin air. Government fraud reports have started tracking these artificial intelligence scams as their own separate category, counting tens of thousands of victims and hundreds of millions of dollars stolen inside a single year. Bob Joyce simply happened to be the perfect target for all of it. He is a real man with a warm and trustworthy face, a vast library of free videos, and an audience of gentle, grieving people who came to him searching for a little comfort. To a faceless operation chasing clicks and cash, that combination is pure gold, and they will strip mine, his kindness, for as long as we keep clicking without ever stopping to think. So the next time one of these confession videos drifts across your screen and your heart leaps at that familiar voice, hold on tight and remember what is truly being sold to you. It is not the truth about Elvis. It is your own hope, packaged and priced and handed right back to you by a stranger who cares nothing at all for the king and nothing at all for you. The single strongest thing you can do is feel that pull. Recognize it honestly for what it really is, and then refuse to let your love be quietly turned into somebody else's paycheck. So tell me down in the comments, did you ever truly believe that Bob Joyce might be Elvis? And what was it about that voice that made the story so impossibly hard to let go of? Share it below, because I read every single one of them, and I honestly want to know what you felt the very first time you heard that old preacher sing.